Hello and welcome to the Treasured Page podcast. I'm Melanie and this is our quiet crafting space. Today I'm coming to you from the craft room and we're going to have a little chat about coffee dyeing paper. What is that? Why would we want to do it? Well, let's discuss this topic. It's a really interesting one and one you'll hear a lot about in the junk journaling community. So snuggle in, get a coffee, get a cup of tea. In fact, let's talk about tea and coffee and their staining abilities on paper. And why would we want to do it? I think the question is, why wouldn't you want to do it? So let's have a little think about what it means to make a paper a different colour and why that could be of an advantage when creative journaling takes place. So in front of me is a little booklet. It's got some papers in there. Now, I could have quite easily put some normal white, bright, bleached paper in there for the purpose of creating a page for artwork or stenciling or sketching, painting, this sort of thing. White paper in a book, that's usual, right? Why wouldn't we want white paper or lined paper in order to write our notes and our everyday thoughts? I think the difference is that we have that available all around us, readily available. What we don't have is non-white paper. And it's the fear of white paper when it comes to creative journaling or having a creative starting point. That white paper is a stopping block for us sometimes. So if you start with a piece of paper that's already got a decorative element to it, already got something slightly damaged or stained upon it, there's a totally different shift in your mindset from feeling like, oh, it's a piece of paper and I can do anything to it, to this has already been used or this has already had something done to it. There's two trains of thought. One side is that it's already junk, it's already rubbish because it's got a stain or a mark or it's a different colour. Therefore, it's not going to be a usable piece of paper to type a letter or for anything formal. It is going to only be for the purpose of creating or throwing away. And if we're going to throw away a piece of paper, well, that's a bit of a shame. That piece of paper never realised its full potential of being a vessel in which to hold your creative artwork or designs. Therefore, a piece of paper with a stain or a mark all over it is going to create a marbled, rippled, textured surface in which for you to have more of a starting point for something creative. And that is one of the reasons we do it. Another reason for creative journalers to have a different coloured paper is that it's already been through a watered process, it's already dried, therefore the paper isn't going to crinkle anymore because it's already done it. So it's not been stretched paper, but it has already had a water application applied to it, so it has a different quality and a different texture. Therefore, it's interesting. It's already starting its process as an interesting piece. And then what it really is crying out for is embellishment and something extra. So if you see a stain within that page, does that spark off a memory for you? Do you see an ink splodge and then think, oh, I can see something in there that suddenly starts you off on a thought process of what it reminds you of? In which case that might start bringing up emotions and memories from the past of when you saw a flower in a field or by a stream. Or maybe it's a watermark and you think, oh gosh, that reminds me of the time where I spilt the coffee on my friend's carpet and oh, we were having such a nice time until that happened and then that led on to this and that led on to that. And suddenly a stain on a piece of paper has sparked off little memories from the past, and they can all be brought to the forefront and you can start journaling about it in a creative way, bringing in pictures. What did that mean to you? That friend, did you get through that upset over her carpet with a coffee stain on it? Do you have a fondness for coffee? Does that mean that reminds you of a time when you've seen that friend out for a social reason and you've had coffee since? There's lots of little reasons. That's just one very small part of it. But how on earth do we do it, and why? Why wouldn't we want to do it when we can think that the paper is certainly going to take on a new lease of life? It doesn't have to be coffee. It could be tea. It could be botanical plant extracts. It could be avocado dye. There's a myriad of different ways and applications that you can dye paper and fabric using what's around you, scraps and natural things. So a coffee dye is often very, very popular because we have that. It's an abundance. It's a waste product. It could be the coffee grounds that you throw out. There's still enough stain in there or a tannin in the tea bags that will allow you to make a mark on paper for free. So the coffee has become, or coffee dyeing has become popular, certainly in America, because coffee is the chosen drink of choice, and it is more so in the UK as well. So how do we do it? Well, there are several ways of doing it, but the most effective way from what I've discovered is to use very, very strong coffee, and it could be the freeze-dried granule coffee that you get. And if you're going to have a go at this, you would need to find a very, very low-cost coffee brand, because it doesn't need to be expensive at all. So you would get the cheapest possible coffee granuled freeze-dried coffee you could get your hands on and go from there. Using a roasting tin, you could fill the coffee up and you could start soaking papers within the bath of the coffee. And the best way to do that is to submerge them individually and get yourself a stack of papers that are soaked in coffee, but don't put a big pile in, otherwise you will have the weight of that pile and that will then cause white marks in the middle of your papers. So you can do this in a lots of different ways. You can put coffee in a spray bottle and then you could lay papers down and you could spray the coffee on. The application of the coffee is fun in itself. That's another creative process. Everything about junk journaling or creative journaling is a process that is fun and mindful. It allows you to slow down and to really engage with the present task in hand and get lost in it, because none of it is complicated or difficult. Some of it is interesting because you get to work out fun techniques. What works for you? What do you enjoy? Would you like to bake your papers after you've stained them in coffee? Would you like to dry them in the sun and use the energy from the natural world? Would you just like them to be left near a heat source and to slowly crisp up overnight? Would you like to flatten them under books when they have finished their process? Do you want to iron them? There's a whole load. It's a massive subject of just dyeing papers. But the simplest, most effective way to do that is just to either paint on the coffee or submerge it in a warm bath of coffee. And the warmer the coffee, the more the paper seems to take it. And then let it drain off. And actually, I've come to change my technique now, where I do then submerge it into a cold water afterwards to remove the coffee on the paper so that there isn't a smell later on. So when you start your coffee dyeing, you have this wonderful aroma going on in the kitchen or wherever, in the craft room, wherever you're dyeing your coffee. You would make a strong pot of coffee in a jug, and then you would have a big roasting tin or something that you only use for your dye, maybe a plastic container, something from IKEA, an A4 tub or a tray, anything that will allow you to capture liquid. And you start by pouring the liquid into the base of your chosen tray or tin, and then you start laying in a paper, and you would then move some of the liquid over the top of your first sheet of paper and saturate everything. And from there you would put the next layer on and repeat the process of covering that sheet of paper entirely in the coffee solution. Your coffee just needs to be water and coffee, but made to a very strong brew, a strong consistency, so it's nice and dark and has a really rich strength and aroma to it. And you just move through your stack of papers, gradually getting them soaked one by one, adding a little bit more coffee as you go. You'll find you actually don't need as much as you think you do. You don't need to have a bath of coffee and soak it in there, but you could, and if you do that you would have to get the papers out fairly quickly. There is a time limit on how long they can sit in a submerged water bath before the fibres of the paper break down. And that's another thing. What paper are you going to dye? You've been looking through your papers, you've been finding all the different things that you could possibly stain or dye. Maybe that's junk envelopes or some scrap copy paper from the photocopier or from your printer. Printer paper is the usual one that we dye. Maybe there's some old letters and things that you're quite happy to use only one side of and you're going to be sticking down the other. And therefore you are recycling letters that come to you, maybe business letters or documents or legal letters, things you no longer need, things you've been storing and you have now, they've surpassed 7 years and you don't need to hang on to them anymore, but it's still good paper. You could stain those with coffee and then you could stick down the written word on the other side, the confidential bit that you don't want to see, that could all get glued in if that's going to just be a project for you. So there you are, you've got an abundance of paper and you may have some coffee lurking in the back of the cupboard. I think that's really important to have a look first and see what you've got. Don't buy new. We've often got a pot of coffee at the back just reserved for those people that only like the instant stuff and they're not fussed about having the fresh coffee. Maybe you have people that come round and you just want to quickly make a coffee and you might have some left at the back that you didn't know you had. It's also mindful, you need to be aware that coffee, as wonderful as it smells when you're doing it, the smell of the coffee, that scent, that rich, lovely, warm, homely smell of coffee isn't always going to remain on your papers. And anyone who has found a jar of coffee lurking at the back of the cupboard and opened it and realised, whoopsie, we should have used that up 2 years ago, you will notice that it has quite an unpleasant smell. Your papers can go in the same way, which is why I've started to sort of rinse them off afterwards just by pouring over fresh water and letting that run off. It really helps reduce the scent of the stale coffee in the future, which can happen. Another way of dealing with it would be to use a bicarbonate of soda, just a teaspoon of, to help reduce the acidity levels in your solution. And I have heard that there's good results if you mix in black tea as well. So if you throw in some tea bags, you can help to neutralise any future smells. But it is so slight, it is a subtle smell, and it is something that you can easily get round by storing your papers, perhaps in a box where there's plenty of air circulating around, and you can always add a laundry dryer sheet just to give that fresh laundry smell so that you don't have papers hanging around to get a smell in the future, because that happens. Paper takes on smells of the surrounding area, so it's nice to store your papers in an old shoebox, for instance, and add a laundry dryer sheet down the side, and then that will help to scent your papers in a pleasing, pleasant way for the future, particularly if you're doing large quantities, big stacks of the papers. So that's the way I do it here at the Treasure page, and we haven't had any problems. So there we go. Those are the top tips, are to add a spoonful of bicarbonate of soda to your solution, add some black tea bags to combat the scent. Also give a final rinse off with some fresh water of your pages before you hang them up to dry, lay them out to dry, or bake them in the oven. And then finally, when they are dry, and you can have the option of squashing them flat under heavy book stack, or you can iron them, you then store them in a nice storage container which has got space around them to breathe, allow the air in, and add a laundry dryer sheet in there as well. So you shouldn't have any problems with that. So the fun thing about having these papers to hand is that then you can paint on them, you can collage onto them, you can decorate them in your decorative papers, you can add pockets, tucks, and be able to put postcards and things that you want to store or keep. You can keep those memory anchors we've been talking about when you go places and you pick up the loyalty card or the special little pamphlet or something that was signalling a good day out, and that was just the little thing that you took as your reminder of the day. Certainly photographs as well are all offset and look really nice with a background that has texture to it. If you're just doing coffee dye and you haven't done anything else to it, you are going to get a nice warm caramel vintage style page. It's going to look slightly yellow and brown. You may get some flecks of colour in there, and you can sprinkle in some coffee granules over the top of some of the pages to give age spots, and that's how that will appear. And then if you want to take the whole idea up a notch, there's lots of things that you can do by adding spice, such as turmeric will give you a yellow tone and make the pages look more aged. So if you want to do vintage style journaling, that's another interesting thing to add to your batch. Maybe do something separate for those papers. Then you have a variety of different colours, some with a more golden yellow tone and others with the brown tone. And if you're using black tea, you'll introduce a rich, more mahogany tone to your papers, and you start to build up a colour palette of different tones of browns. And the reason coffee and tea is interesting is that certainly the tea has a tannin within it that stains papers, that sticks and stays. And you know that from when you've seen commercials advertising whitening toothpaste. If anybody is drinking tea and coffee as their regular drink on a daily basis, there's traces of it that end up on our teeth. So we know that there's stains in these products, in these natural products that you would find in your everyday. And if you don't have them, if you don't drink things like that or go caffeine free, then you can still find people that will have that jar of coffee in the back of their cupboard, or you could just have that for your purpose of your creative endeavours. So there's lots of other applications that you could do to make your papers interesting. You could throw rock salt on top of the pages and allow the salt to react with the coffee. By pushing the coffee dye away, you get interesting images, little granulated spots. You could throw rice on. The rice sometimes sucks up some of the dye and leaves an impression on the paper. And you can also spray the coffee in a spray bottle, put it in a spray bottle and spray directly onto the paper through a stencil so that you get a stenciled image. You could also use lace so that you get a nice lace effect over the top of your papers. And the possibilities there will take you all sorts of places, and you'll find that that's a fun thing in itself. I've recently found some netting that had quite a wide weave to it, and I laid that over paper and then sprayed the coffee through. Well, it didn't work too brilliantly, but when the netting was then wet, and it was cotton as well, so it was like a gauze, like a fabric. Maybe burlap would work, and you soak that in the coffee and then you lay that down and maybe put some pressure on the top, and you allow the burlap to make an imprint on your paper. When you take that off, you will be left with a crisscross effect, like a plaid effect of the burlap making a mark on the paper. And when you start thinking like that, you start looking at the things around your home. What have I got that I could lay down on a paper and make an impression? Would some scrunched up tissue that has been soaked in the coffee, would that leave an interesting mark when pushed down on the paper and deliver an interesting scrunched up look? What if I put soap to some coffee solution and start blowing bubbles in it so that the bubbles come up out of the top of the cup? Maybe those bubbles have enough coffee stain within them to pop on a page and leave an interesting bubbled impression. So all of these things are possible. You can have a little try. You can also store your coffee solution at the end of the day when you finish with it. So if you have coffee left over, you can put that in a jar, like a mason jar or an old jar that you've washed out, an old jam jar. And you can add some white vinegar, white pickling vinegar, white distilled vinegar, just a nice big squirt of it to a standard jar, and you will find that that will store for a while. Until you want to use it again. It's not going to go mouldy because you're not introducing any dairy products. And if you're using tea bags, old tea bags, make sure that they haven't had any milk or sugar or anything like that. You wouldn't want to add anything too foody to your mixture. Plant-based things that you're going to be using to dye your papers, and don't introduce too many additives. Otherwise you will find that you are creating something that's either acidic and going to break down in the future, or it's a food source where you could introduce mold spores to that. You don't want that. You want everything thoroughly dried and thoroughly stained. And the subject of coffee dyeing paper is all over YouTube on many different platforms you will be able to find. It's certainly not a new technique. It's something I remember doing as a child when I had a history homework and we had to make a map and we had to stain it or dye the paper using an old tea bag just to age the paper down. And that's really where this comes from, this technique. So you will be able to use that. And then you'll be able to see the different applications that you can use, and by adding it into the oven just to dry it, maybe you've got a hot oven, you will be able to see the different effects that you get from baking your papers to just leaving it to dry naturally. So I'm just flicking through some of the pages that I've added here to a mini journal and seeing that the different effects, I find that the papers come out differently every time, and that's usually due to where they are within the pack when they are being dyed in a tin, and some are lighter and some are darker. So the ones at the bottom that have been in there longer with the highest concentrate of coffee will come out as a darker tone than the ones on the top that weren't in for as long. So halfway through, you could just turn them over, and really the process of them soaking in the coffee is probably only 15 minutes. I don't think you'd want to extend it much longer. Once everything is saturated and it's taken up the dye, and you've maybe used a nice warm coffee, boiled the kettle and made a proper cup of coffee, maybe let it cool for a bit, you're going to be working with warm water and coffee and maybe a spoonful of bicarbonate of soda. That can help intensify the colour as well, and it's certainly going to reduce the acidity and keep your papers acid free, and then they would be able to be used for archival purposes as well. So do have a look at my channel on YouTube for the treasured page. You'll be able to see how I go about my coffee and tea and turmeric and spice dyeing papers, and you will find that there are many videos within our junk journaling community on YouTube as well. And have fun with it. The whole point is to create something that gives you a starting point for feeling like you could stick something else on top of it and it have a lovely background colour, a nice warm tone, something that is not formal, not from the office, not from our everyday lives, but something that transports us into a different time and space. And maybe that journaling experience is one in which you feel more comfortable with, and one in which you can reignite nostalgic memories that feel warm and comforting to you, particularly in times of our lives where we just need to remember good times, or we need to hark back to a time in which we want to explore maybe in history, or perhaps for some of you out there, you're looking into your roots, you're looking into your family tree. And maybe you're considering what your ancestors' lives might have been like in the 1800s, the 1700s, and you're interested in that because there's a connection there for you. Perhaps your family were from another country and you don't know much about that, and perhaps you haven't got the ability to go and visit because of expense or other reasons, and you just would like to connect in some way to that side that makes part of you. If you find that you have ancestors in a different country and you know nothing about the culture, then looking back in history at a time when your parents or your ancestors left that country and came to find new adventures, what were they leaving behind? Why were they leaving it behind? What made them do that? And what wonders did they grow up with, those values and those traditions that may still exist now in your family, but you don't really know them? You think, we've always done it that way, but that way was something that isn't similar to other people. That may be harping back because your family were from Ireland or Scotland or England, or they came from France or Scandinavia or all over the world. What little traditions do you still have in your modern day family that harp back to a time where your ancestors came from somewhere else? So that is a really interesting part of junk journaling. Journal some of those things using that time frame and images from that style of history is only going to look a lot more interesting on a page in which would suggest it came from that time. And that's what a coffee-stained paper can do. It can transport you back in time, and it can also warm up modern-day autumn and fall crafts when you've got those caramel colours going on. It takes the fear of the white page away and allows you to be a bit freer and have some fun with the paper and claim the paper, own the paper, put your stamp on the paper right from the word go. So you're already committing to the journal because you feel you've put personal time and effort into making those pages. You have put something of you on those pages from the very first moment you decided to put a stain on the papers. So I think it's a really huge subject, and the coffee dyeing and the tea staining are certainly a very inexpensive, totally affordable way of making your pages your own right from the beginning. And it's those pages that you will then bind into a book and decorate in your own way, in your quiet crafting space, and just allow you time to calm down, unwind from the world and all the things that are going on, and really enjoy the process of journaling. So I'm going to leave it there, guys, and thank you so much for listening. And above everything else, just slow down and make crafting time for you. Bye-bye now.